Okay, so this is the second week that we're looking at social media and our theme of antisocial networks. So social networks, how they tip over into being antisocial networks. So we're looking at some examples of cyber abuse, cyber bullying, cyber shaming, cyber stalking. Again, that constant use of the cyber word there. It's a bit of a cliche, but on the other hand, it's what's been adopted to help differentiate these kind of online, mobile, digital network practices from their kind of offline, real world counterparts. I say real world and give myself a bit of a shrug because this is equally real world. Okay, so what we're talking about really is offline versus online. Yeah, again, fraud and exploitation. So let's go and have a look at some. So we're going to have a quick think about definitions of social media and social networking sites. Definitions will vary, but it's always useful to have one. Okay. Always good for all topics to have a working definition that you found from somewhere. Again, some general issues and characteristics just very briefly, and then we'll look at some specific examples and summarize it. So these definitions are actually taken from a Department of Work and Pensions report from the UK government that was looking into using social media for research and stuff. Again, I'll make sure that the report itself is linked in on now, so if you want to have a look at it. So here we've got a working definition as an example of a working definition. So if media is simply means of communication, social media may be defined as websites or other internet-based services where the content being communicated is created by the people who use the service. This idea about user-generated content, in other words, we're looking at. And then different social media sites structure these production and consumption roles differently. Some sites such as Wikipedia award status based on the amount of previously produced for the community and only allow users with a certain status to take certain types of action. Other sites such as Facebook allow essentially everyone to create the same kind of content. So again, it's this idea about it being kind of user-generated content. So it's that the users are actually creating the content. Okay, so it'd be too simplistic to say that Facebook doesn't create content. Okay. Facebook and Wikipedia and YouTube and stuff, they do create some content, but the vast majority is produced by users of the site. Okay. So here we've got a social media definition from the Law Society. Again, I'll put a link in on now for you so you can find where this was from. I think the reference is actually hidden in these slides. In the notes section, I might put it in there as well. Right, so social media is defined as websites and applications that enable users to create and share content or to participate in social networking. Social media are web-based and mobile technologies that turn communication into active dialogue. There are many different types of social media channels which attract specific audiences for different purposes. These include, and then we look at some examples. Okay, so social networking generally, such as Facebook and LinkedIn. Video and photo sharing, very popular of course, so Flickr, Instagram, YouTube, all focused around that. Then weblogs, or blogs as they're often called, it's corporate and personal blogs where people can effectively just create stuff and put it out there for people to come along and read and find. Okay, it's their own little bit of the web. And then these micro-blogging sites, so very short communications, such as Twitter and Tumblr. Right? So these are examples, and again, this is a definition of them from the Law Society. So you get a sense there's a big overlap with the previous definition from the Department of Work and Pensions, but the point is just find some published working definitions. If you're looking at this, you'll find it really helpful and really useful. And again, well, we've got another couple of definitions here that we find useful. Again, you'll see there's a big overlap, okay? And there's a bit of fuzziness around them. But one of the things I've been saying is it can be difficult to define them exactly because they're a moving target, and also especially if we try to differentiate social media from social networks, they often kind of copy characteristics from one another if these prove to be commercially popular, okay? So do bear that in mind. So social network sites, again, we've got another useful sense of here of what makes them into social network sites, what it is that they define them, what's different. And one of the things that happens, of course, is that what they're doing is they're connecting people that otherwise probably wouldn't connect in any real sense. Yeah. So obviously, if you live in a big town or city, there are lots of people you'd never connect with because you'd just never be in the same kind of time and location together. And social networking sites, these web-based platforms, certainly mean that lots of people who almost certainly would never have come into any kind of social contact, okay, can now come into social contact because that thing of place and to some extent that thing of time, okay, are negated. This is a useful little map of social networking sites to give you a sense of which are the dominant ones, okay. So Facebook, of course, very popular, very dominant, lots of users, you know, a couple of billion active users. Qzone, also very popular, we look at that in China. Instagram is also quite popular in some areas, okay. Contacti, and I can't remember how to pronounce the one that's in yellow, I think that's an Indian one. But we tend to forget, we tend to be a bit Western centric and just think of things like Facebook and stuff, but I did make the point in last week's session that actually it's not just Silicon Valley sites, but increasingly sites from China are becoming very important, but also kind of Asia and the Far East generally. You know, there are large, burgeoning, technologically advanced civilizations, societies out there, okay? It's important to bear in mind. And also another area that's often underlooked and underplayed is Africa. So Facebook's very popular there, but it's slightly different experience because Facebook's really, really popular on mobile. So in some parts of the so-called third world, some of the more still yet developing countries, you might find there's a different emphasis on the user experience. So there's fewer people using traditional desktops and laptops, a lot of people using mobile access, okay, because they don't necessarily have regular power supplies and things like that. This is also true in parts of like Latin America and South America and that kind of thing as well. So access is much more through kind of mobile phones, and mobile phones can be recharged using solar power and all this kind of stuff. So there are kind of socio-economic things which also affect how people interact with things like social networks. So as we said, lots of cyber stuff here, lots of variations on kind of traditional crimes, but with that kind of technological element that's brought into it. So I don't need to list them all again because I just did it a few minutes ago and we've done it in previous weeks. But you get a sense now of what's out there. But importantly, there isn't a single cybercrime. Just like there isn't a single crime, okay, but there are many different types of crime, okay, that's equally true for so-called cybercrimes. Again, in terms of criminal characters and victims, so again, you know, there are bullies out there, there are domestic abusers, serious sexual abusers, there are extortionists out there, there are people who are engaged in fraud and this kind of stuff. We know that young women are more frequent victims of certain classes of offences, okay? So certainly a lot of casual misogyny, a lot of casual bullying, but certainly also they're targeted for sexual exploitation, okay? Women face general abuse and sexually focused abuse, as I said, gender dimension. Whilst the sexual abuse and sexploitation is something that may readily come to mind, there's also a lot of just general abuse aimed at women, and it's aimed at women simply because they are women, okay? So there's a hate crime aspect to this, there's a misogynistic aspect to it. I'll put a link into a podcast that covers this neatly. So there's always been some men who've had problems with women, but there's an increasingly number of kind of organised groups, including people who are the so-called incels, involuntary celibates, okay? And again, the podcast I'll link into this, you'll find a really useful discussion of it. Men are more likely to face kind of racial or other character trait abuse, maybe abuse around their nationality, maybe abuse around other things to do with them, it may be things to do linked with sports and stuff as well, so people arguing over football teams and that kind of abuse. But certainly sexuality, physical appearances and the other things you would expect, abuse based around politics and things like that as well. Indeed, the abusers are often male, especially for certain categories, but not always so. Yeah. So a lot of hate that's directed towards women, especially younger women, is from males, but not exclusively so. And the reason that these things matter is that we need to get a sense of who are the victims and who are the abusers here, because if we're going to come up with crime reduction initiatives, then we need to understand it. Yeah, so we'll need different policies for different types of individuals who are perhaps committing offences, because we need to know they'll have different kinds of motivations. This would be equally true if we were talking about people engaged in fraud or people engaged in things like hacking. Okay. For the victims, what are the consequences? Okay. Well, it depends on the offence, and we'll look at some sample ones. And again, it's easy sometimes if people are talking in terms of things like bullying and stuff like that, to think that, well, you know, it's not really that problematic. It's not like it's somebody's physically bullying you in the street or somebody's in the same room as you, etc., etc. But actually, it can be really problematic, and things like so-called revenge porn as well, the non-consensual sharing of intimate images, can be particularly traumatic, as well as people sharing things like just personal text and personal information. So it's not always sexual stuff. It might sometimes be, you know, just deeply emotional stuff where people have confided in people about things that they're going through, whether it's, you know, to do with relationships or whatever it happens to be, or maybe things about their mental health, and then those are also inappropriately shared by people. So people may suffer just embarrassment around stuff. They may suffer much deeper mental anguish. There may be active psychological abuse being directed at them. A common thing here we see is secondary victimization, so people become targets of further victimization. So somebody may be abused, for example, by one individual, and then we see a kind of pile-on. We see this as well with things like, again, so-called revenge porn, where somebody may have their intimate images shared, and then other people pile in, and there's often a lot of so-called slut shaming. There's other people coming to pour abuse on them, and this again won't just be males, this will include females as well. Okay, so whilst a lot of the initial offences may be men making kind of inappropriate, just nasty misogynistic comments, hateful comments, okay, and especially where there's a sexual element to it, the wider pile-on will tend to be more mixed in terms of who's piling on and dealing with that. And again, it just, you know, it may be, and we'll see an example of this, where somebody may have been targeted by one particular type of exploiter, okay, initially, but then the fact that they've been exploited brings them to the attention of a wider community, and then can bring them into a, you know, a range of abuse and exploitation, not just whatever the initial incident was. So yeah, they can become targets of more serious offences. So even something that you think, well, it's just kind of teenagers at school, and this is just peer-on-peer abuse and bullying. If it's taking part on external networks, it can then bring them to the attention of, you know, seriously problematic individuals, including people who might want to carry out really serious physical harm to somebody, including sexual abuse and sexual attacks, etc. People may suffer other real-life consequences, right? So people have been forced to move home. People have been forced to change jobs. Okay, they may have to, you know, leave and go to a different city and hope that this is left behind them. Because again, one of the problems with this being facilitated by network technology is that it's persistent. Okay, so it's not like an incident that perhaps takes place where maybe everyone's at a party or everyone's at some kind of meeting where there's lots of people, and there's an incident, and there's a terrible incident, and somebody's deeply hurt and embarrassed, maybe physically so, but certainly mentally so, and there are people there who witness it, right? But then gradually, for most people, that kind of memory will start to fade away, and there's other things going on in life, and people may talk about it for some time afterwards, but it's all second hand. Okay, so people are describing it, people have got their own memories of what happened. So it did different now, where somebody may be able to capture it on camera or record the audio, and then take photographs of it, whether it's the video or stills, and then share that around to wider networks. So suddenly people who weren't even at the incident have got this really kind of graphic representation of whatever it was that went on, and they can then pile on in their own way and share it and cause further problems for people. So the technology has the effect of kind of amplifying and sustaining whatever harm was done in the original incident. Okay. Again, if I give an example of somebody being bullied at school, it's a terrible thing when somebody's perhaps bullied and assaulted at school, but you can find examples on social media where somebody's, for example, physically assaulting somebody else and they're calling them names, okay, and that person's been hurt and they're embarrassed as well and they're deeply upset, and there's an accomplice to the bully who's recording all this, who then shares it around on social media to make it even worse for the victim. Okay. So we're going to talk about, harassment, but linked to this, we'll find ideas around privacy and surveillance, and certainly maintaining our privacy can help reduce harassment, especially with certain types of offence. But also hacking will come into this. So we think about people hacking into computer systems, but actually people who are engaged in fraud, or people who are in pursuit of sexual materials, for example, will hack into people, and social media accounts, okay, are a common vector, or a common target for this. So one of the things I said right at the start is that sometimes the topics will be interrelated and intersect. So just because the headline for a topic is about social media, or it's about hacking or piracy or whatever, that's not to say that it doesn't interconnect. Just like the technology interconnects in the internet, okay, many of the topics that we look at will interconnect, and we can look at them in different ways. In terms of a bit of historical context, so we're focused on social media and social networking sites for this section of the module, but just it links back to, again, this increasing availability of photos and videos, which goes back to the fact that we're all walking around with these cameras and devices now, okay. So I can take fantastic quality photos for this, I can record high definition video, I can record audio, and I can distribute it and put it on all kinds of platforms with no intermediary. Yeah, so I can upload it to all kinds of accounts, share it, I can give it to a global audience potentially with no intermediary between me capturing the material and uploading and distributing the material. So that's one of the things that's different. Live video is also of increasing user concern, so again, live streaming that we'll look at is a particular issue. It's particularly problematic. We are aware, and you will be aware perhaps as well, of events where, again, assaults have been live streamed, the death of people, violent deaths have been live streamed, and the sexual assault of people have been live streamed. Okay, so this live streaming is also a new serious issue. We'll look at it in more detail elsewhere, but with live streaming, it's difficult for the authorities to deal with live streaming because it's not like there's a video file that's up there waiting to be found and discovered, okay? Because the live stream means that it only happens while that live stream is active. So it can be quite difficult for people to police and to deal with. And again, a live streamed assault might even further add to the kind of emotional, mental damage that's been done to the particular victim. Okay, online harassment, as we said, it's not new. You've got harassment in the time of email and text messaging and fax messaging and this kind of stuff. So we know it's it's a thing that's, the technology bit has been around for a couple of decades, mediating it, but now we've got more and more stuff that's taking place kind of online through social media, through social networks, through either the websites or through the apps and the communication channels that they have. Okay, so if we look at things like trolls, for example, we'll go through some specific things. These may be people who, they're seeking to cause offence, they're seeking to cause some degree of harm to people. They may be making kind of threatening statements and suggestions. So you can't define exactly what they're going to do, because it may be just kind of low-level stuff, and we'll see loads of it on sites like Twitter and Facebook and this kind of stuff. But it may be something much more threatening in nature, as we'll see. Okay, so they may claim that no offence was intended. Okay, but that's part of their defence thing. So high-profile cases, sadly, you'll see on a regular basis the racial harassment of footballers. If you look at the kind of things that appear on Twitter, and occasionally we'll have these little videos that do the rounds on social media. and wider broadcast media of footballers reading out the kind of harassment that they've received. Okay, and a common thing is for the racial harassment of footballers in things like the Premier League. What you'll also find is high-profile cases, including sexual and threatening harassment of women. And again, you may have come across some of the videos where we've got people with a high profile who are reading out some of the threats that they are sent. And these threats are often of a very violent nature, a very sexually specific nature. Okay, and the problem, as I hinted at before, is for these people as well, are these credible threats? You know, are these threats just coming from some hopeless person who's hundreds of miles away and will never ever carry these out, or is this somebody who's actually flagging up an intent to create to carry out that act in person at some point? Men and women can both be victims, okay, but we do notice that there's more of a pattern of when women speaking out, they do tend to get put down by men a bit more, and there have been issues as well in certain cultural areas, okay. So in some kind of sporting forums where people are talking about it, women's voices can be generally put down. It's also true of things like gaming things, okay. So again, Gamergate, Gamergate, look it up if you've not come across that, but we'll give you more examples of this kind of stuff. Okay, let's look at an example of this specifically. So, like Jane Austen on a banknote. Okay, so here we got a public campaign as a trigger. Yeah. So Caroline Credo Perez, you can look up information about her on the Twitter abuse case. And I've got some quotes from the court case. These quotes come from the Guardian. Yeah, and what we're seeing here is quotes like crap. Rape is the last of your worries. Right, these are things that have been said to her. Yeah, these are the kind of threats that she's getting. Yeah, all because she dared to suggest that perhaps we ought to put Jane Austen on the £10 note when they were looking for somebody new for the new design who should put on. Got lots of men on the currencies. Let's put Jane Austen on a banknote. Yeah, absolutely triggered a wave of people who were abusive and threatening, as you can see. Again, the problem is, right, are these idle threats, are these empty threats, or are these threats coming from somebody who's actually capable, right, of carrying out those threats? I'll put this original PowerPoint slide up, so you can always click on the links and go and have a look at it. I'll just show you a sample one now. Hopefully the screen capture will get it. So I don't flippantly swear in these things, but where I'm quoting something from a legal case, then I think it's only appropriate that we do, okay, because it gives you that real sense of invective and the danger. Yeah, if I'm censoring out all this stuff, it's not doing any justice to the victims here. So again, have a look. We've put links in, and I'll make sure that these links are up for you, and all these abusive tweets and malicious communications that she was getting, and it's quite interesting, very sad, but also quite interesting about the sheer level of abuse that she's had to encounter. So I'm just going to go back over into here, and again, this was the Guardian was quoting from it. So, to plead guilty to abusive tweets. So, two people in particular. Okay, so she got loads of abuse, but from a couple of people in particular, it was seen as so abusive and so threatening that the police were involved. Okay, and these people were taken to court over it. Right, so I'm going back. You can look at the details. I'm deliberately not talking in great detail about what they were charged with here, because that's something I will talk about in the seminars. Okay. Right. So again, it led to suggestions: do we need new laws? Okay. Should there be should the pressure on the platforms? Yeah. So what should Twitter do about this? What should Facebook do about it? Should these neutral communication platforms, should they be held responsible in some way for policing what some users are saying about other users? Brexit, again, public campaign as a trigger. So Gina Miller, part of a group seeking legal clarification about some parts of the Brexit process. received lots of online abuse and threats. Lots of it was racist, lots of it was sexist, sexual as well, okay? And again, I put links in here, you can go and have a look at it, or you can do some independent searches for it. But what we've got here in both cases are women who are suddenly getting a public profile because of something, Jane Austen on a £10 note, or here somebody questioning and campaigning on particular aspects of Brexit, which suddenly makes them very open, very exposed, and as we discover, very vulnerable to huge amounts of abuse. Even if some of the people abusing, even if most of the people abusing were not capable of actually carrying out those threats, okay, that's still a big threat that's hanging over these individuals, yeah. And to perhaps read hundreds or thousands, literally thousands of comments of people telling you how useless you are, how worthless you are, can't be good for your mental health. But certainly where people are carrying, again, specific threats against you and against your family, against things like your office staff, etc., it's very difficult. Okay. Again, social media and MPs. If you look at Anna Soubry's, for example, she was being told on social media, again, high profile local MP. She's now an former MP for this area, for Broxtowe. And things like, being told, remember what happened to Jo Cox. Okay, and Jo Cox, of course, was murdered by somebody. She was an MP and campaigner who was murdered by somebody. So if somebody's sending you messages saying, remember what happened to Jo Cox, then the message is clear. Okay. Again, lots of offensive terms in some of this. I'll put the link into you. You can go through, and if it's still up there, you were to listen to it. At one time, Anna Soubry couldn't go home. The police advised her that it wasn't safe for her to do so because it was difficult, right, to work out were these just empty threats, or some of these are threats that might actually get carried out. Diane Abbott, another very high-profile woman, again, she has received huge amounts of sexual abuse and huge amounts of racial abuse over the years, and she receives far more abuse than many other MPs. Okay, so we've got a clear pattern here where we're looking at lots of women receiving abuse. Not just women, men will receive abuse as well, but this is just showing up that for some of the things that we've definitely got a gender example, a gender perspective. Okay. So social media is an amplifier for misogyny. Yeah, so who trolls and who engages in this kind of harassment and abusive behaviour? Like I said, there are many categories of particular types of crime which are male dominated. It's not exclusively male perpetrators, right? But there's a clear kind of general pattern here for certain types of crime. And indeed, just some of the worst Twitter trolls, it turns out, can be women. We can't always tell from people's identities, or not initially, but where the police choose to go into a matter and pursue a matter, then we can sometimes find the real identity of the person. And that certainly happened in the case against Caroline Credo-Priaz, where two people were taken to court. Okay, two people were making threats to her, mentioned a few slides ago. One of them was a man and one of them was a woman. Okay, so out of all the threats that she got, the two that were considered the most sustained and serious came from two particular accounts. One of them turned out to be a man, and one of them it turned out to be a woman. Again, I'll put this up, and there's links in that you can go and look at if it's an area that you're interested in, and we'll talk about it in the seminars. Okay, celebrity nude photos. Again, public profile as a trigger, right? There are millions, probably billions, but certainly many millions of images of naked people on the internet. Okay, also being shared around social networks, shared around people's private groups, etc., etc., etc. But there's a certain subgroup of people which are celebrities, and especially female celebrities, okay, that are prized by some people, okay, that not just any old naked image, not just any old video clip of somebody having sex, but that of a high profile female celebrity, okay, attracts additional interest. And there's a good example of this is looking back at the 2014 celebrity photo hack. It was known as the fapping, and this is where female celebrities, majority female celebrities, are females involved, but the clear majority were females. They were targets of hacking and then so-called revenge porn postings. Okay, again, revenge porn, contentious phrase. These people hadn't done anything to warrant revenge. This was the unauthorized abuse of the sharing of intimate images. Okay, and the images weren't necessarily hosted on social media sites, but they did end up on some. But social media had a role in letting people know about these images being available, and people were then seeking further information. Okay, and these celebrities back in 2014, what they suffered from was hacks. Okay, so they weren't sharing their images that then got shared by partners without permission, stuff like that. This was where they were perhaps having images linked to their iPhones, and somebody worked out that they could perhaps hack into their iPhones and into their associated accounts and have a look through and see if people had images of themselves that they'd taken with partners, etc. That weren't intended for public consumption. They were never intended for public consumption, but people could hack in and share. Okay, but certainly social media had a big role in amplifying this, because how do people know about it? Because it ended up all over social media. Yeah, being shared around social media, social networks, and when these became available as downloads on various sites, again, it was social media. It was the way that most people found out about it and found out where you could actually go and download it. And then, as I said, some people were reposting stuff on social media to make matters worse still. Let me get a drink of water, because I realise I'm a bit quiet and struggling. Sorry. Okay, so what are the possible responses to this? Okay, well, it was quite interesting. Jennifer Lawrence was one of the people whose images were shared, and she was saying, well, you know, there's the question: does viewing the pictures perpetrate abuse? And Jennifer Lawrence, as a victim, took a very clear view here that she announced this particular hack, denounced it as a sex crime. Okay. She made very clear that if you click on the links to download the images of these hacked files, okay, and you know that nobody intended to share them, okay, then you are an abuser yourself to some degree. That was her clear take on it, as somebody whose images were being shared around. Yeah. And again, you've got links in here. I'll make sure that they're on now as well as in here, so you can go and have a look at this. If it's an area that interests you. Okay, so again, when we're looking at these things, there's always more information to look at, and for some people this kind of surface level information is sufficient because it's not one of your kind of key interest topic areas, but where you want to know more stuff, then again there's more links and materials on now, more links within the PowerPoint, etc., for you to go and look up more information if that suits you. Okay, and then there's again, Emma Holton, who was another victim of hacking. I won't click on it now, but you can click on that link and it will take you through to a video of her talking about it and talking about trying to reclaim herself. And again, she was the victim where her computer was hacked, images was then circulated around and kind of reposted on lots of sites. And again, what we see with some of these instances is not just them being recirculated kind of around general social media and social networking sites, but a lot of the images and video clips end up on kind of specialist or focused kind of sexual content sites, you know, pornography sites, which is looking at commercially exploiting these images then within that. Okay, what about YouTubers and victimization? There's some minor and major things. So if we're looking at other types of victimization, sometimes it might be a relatively minor thing, okay, that turns into a big row. So here we've got an example of a YouTuber who was trying to kind of blag free accommodation in a hotel because she saw herself as an influencer, and it turned into a big row with lots of people seriously turning against her and, you know, abusing her. So even minor things might bring you quite widespread attention. The image on the right is Chrissy Chambers. Okay, now she was the winner of a revenge porn court case, but again, unfortunately, she became the victim of both of them what we call the Streisand effect, where when you suddenly kind of talk about something, okay, so YouTuber Ellie Darby was talking about something really quite minor, but suddenly got a lot of attention. Chrissy Chambers was talking about something much more serious, okay, she was talking about how that she'd been the victim of so-called revenge porn, and there's, again, you can click on the link to see the information about it. But the problem is, sometimes if you seek legal redress, if you seek your rights, okay, if you seek to get some kind of accommodation or something from the courts to sort out what you want, the problem is it can give you a big public profile, and that means that people then are aware that there are images of you circulating, they're aware that there are videos of you out there, which perhaps they wouldn't have done otherwise, okay? So this is another problem that's sometimes faced by people who are victims. Okay, shame to suicide. So some victims of cybercrime may suffer a number of consequences. Shame and embarrassment, as we've mentioned previously. It may be the loss of family and friends, so relationships are ruined. Could be the loss of income and social upheaval. Forced to move job, school, home. Many victims suffer secondary victimisation, as we've said, and it seems to be more common online. Again, people can reach out, people pile on, people join in with the bullying. Some victims cannot cope and see no solution but suicide. Yeah. So these offences have potentially fatal consequences. So things like low-level bullying and what might initially be kind of low-level exploitation, okay, it can roll along, it can be amplified, it can get worse and worse and worse, and we'll look at some examples of this. So here we've got Tyler Clementi at Rutgers University. He was the victim of secret webcam surveillance. Yeah. Again, got some links in. You can go and look him up if you want to do a Google search for Tyler Clementi. Again, this has links in. So what we're looking at here on the video, these are actually hyperlinks that you can go to and have a look at. Tyler, some of his roommates decided for a laugh to kind of set up a webcam to secretly record Tyler in his shared university accommodation because they thought it would be funny, because they thought that Tyler was having sex with another male student, and wouldn't it be funny to catch them on video and to share it around and have a laugh. Unfortunately for Tyler, okay, his sexual preferences were not known to his home community, right? So his family and friends back home. And he was so distraught when he realised that he'd been recorded by his so-called friends that he committed suicide. He jumped off the George Washington Bridge, okay, to commit suicide. So that may not have been their intention, okay, when they did this thing. And I keep saying, you know, his friends and it was done for a laugh, but actually if you click on the links and go look it up, the actual court cases, and 2 people ended up in court over this, it's much more interesting if you look at the court transcripts, okay, as to what their intent was and what their perhaps perceptions of it were, etc., etc. Again, if it's an area that interests you, go and have a little further look at it. Okay, here we've got Amanda Todd, who is the victim of multiple crimes. I'll look at Amanda Todd in more detail in a separate session. So here a single incident snowballed out of control. There were multiple secondary problems. She was abused by her peers at school and college, and then she was later exploited by a Dutch adult paedophile. Again, there's some links in here which I won't play at the moment, and Amanda's video is quite famous. You may have come across it, you may have seen it. And this is a still that you're looking at, okay, on here. This is hyperlinked into the video, but what we're looking at is a still, and you can probably read on that little card, it says, "I have nobody, I need someone." She's got a sad face. And in that video, Amanda is simply going through a series of cards explaining what she did, right? And it all was triggered by her being on a site at one point on a webcam. She chose to expose a breast briefly. That was it. but it doesn't matter, because as soon as it's done, the people on the other side are screen capturing it, okay, and then it gets shared round, and then the common thing is, oh, you've exposed your breast, now we want to see more. If you don't do that, guess what, we've got details of your family and friends, and here is proof that we've got their social media profiles. So the sextortion process begins. Okay, I will come back and talk in Amanda's case in a lot more detail. It's really sad. You can watch the video. It's normally got a soundtrack to it. Occasionally it's been removed, but there's a soundtrack there. You can click on it and you can watch it, and you can see Amanda just detailing all these little cards about how it all snowballed, and then she got bullied, okay, and she moved schools and it was better for a while, but then somebody at a new school kind of looked up her old school, and they were going, oh, Amanda Todd, we've got lots to tell you about Amanda Todd, and it snowballed. So she was getting bullied at school. She was also exploited by an adult paedophile, and this video where she's doing the little cards and kind of telling everyone about it, she doesn't speak on the video, just showing you the cards, was taken just a few hours before she killed herself. Yeah, so really sad, very serious consequences. One of the things that we'll look at in the case of Amanda, where we'll come back and look at Amanda in specific detail, along with a small number of other instances, is that in some cases it led to a change in the legislation. Because you can imagine that in Amanda's case, and sadly there are several other cases which led to people taking their own lives, where they've been either bullied and abused, but often there was a sexual exploitation element in it as well, okay? Parents and family and friends, but also people in the legal profession, people in the police service and stuff said, well, surely this is illegal, okay? But it turned out it wasn't necessarily illegal what was done, okay? In some instances it was, but the legislation wasn't very effective, or it wasn't obvious. And if thousands of people are piling on with secondary bullying, well, surely that should be illegal, okay? But any one of those individuals may be posting a nasty comment, which is a very low level offence, maybe not even illegal at all. But the cumulative effect for the victim is of course terrible, and you can understand why the families are seeking redress around this and why this happened. And so what we see as a response to this in some instances is that there were changes in legislation, and I will detail those in the session where we specifically look at Amanda and a number of related cases. But also we often find that the family and friends set up kind of foundations, charitable foundations, in the hope of promoting education and giving people kind of help and advice, so that people who've suffered similar things don't end up going down the same route. Okay, so as I said, Tyler Clementi is one example. I've got some links in here to where you could go and look at more information about particular charities and stuff. I will make sure that this PowerPoint is up online if it's something you're interested in. Okay, so just to shame to suicide, looking at kind of sextortion generally. Okay, this particular one, victims of sextortion. Okay, there's a subset of it which is the sextortion. Okay, the blackmail, sexual blackmail of young men. Right. So whilst young women are often exploited for further sexual material, with young men they're often exploited for financial rewards, and it's often crime gangs which have lured people into exposing themselves or engaging in sexual activity while on a webcam, and they think they're chatting to another individual. It's often a woman, okay, but because of what can happen as a result of it, people end up committing suicide because they are so appalled if they can't. So the blackmailers will demand a fee from them, and they will say, look, we've got your social media details. Do you really want your mother and your grandmother and your schoolmates and your employer, etc., to see the images or video clip we've got of you engaged in sexual activity while you're on the webcam? Okay, if you don't pay up, then we will share that information about. Some people are simply not in a position to pay up, okay, and even when they begged the blackmailers not to release that information, the information, those intimate images, are still being released, and it's led to people committing suicide. Okay, so the police now take things like this very seriously. Again, about a bit like some other aspects, they underplayed it at first, but now take it very seriously, and they put advice out there about what to do, how to respond to it. Okay, and to get a sense of the scale of it, there was, just a single Sextortion botnet was pumping out 30,000 emails in an hour. These emails go out, or text messages go out, or it goes out as like Twitter DMs and stuff like that, where it's people going, "Hi, I've seen you on the site, and I think you look nice, let's be friends," etc., that kind of thing. And it's trying to inveigle you into sharing links, and then you think you are engaged in a conversation or engaged in a video call with somebody who at the other end who's stripping off, getting involved in sexual activity. You are encouraged to do the same. That's the point at which, of course, they get you and they can exploit you. Okay, so again, these underlying properties of the technology, which I'll re-mention on a regular basis. The fact it's convenient, it's inexpensive, it gives a long reach, there's perceived anonymity. Okay, the disinhibiting effects of the technology, individually and collectively. It's very public, it's very scalable. There's opportunities for a mob mentality, so you can see that other people have piled in on this person, and actually, do you know what, I might pile in on that person as well. I might engage in slut shaming as well, right? Because actually that puts me in a better position with everyone else at school. Yeah, because I'm now part of the gang because I've had a go at that person. The transient becomes permanent. The here and now becomes everywhere. Okay, the internet is a time machine, etc. So again, I will keep mentioning these underlying things and how they feed into some of these particular crimes and stuff that we see. Getting in terms of how to police social networks. How might we police it? Yeah, when there's huge communities of people engaged in online activity, how on earth do we actually police this? Should social network companies be policing them, or should the police be policing them? Okay. Can they use computer algorithms? Can we not just use technology to defeat the exploitation of technology? It's difficult to do. There are things that can be done, and companies do stuff. Companies also employ moderators. Okay. A really good article to look at is this article on Facebook moderators. I won't call it up now, but if you're interested, click on the link that'll be available on now for you through this slide, or I'll put it in as a direct link. And it gives you a sense of the conditions they're under. Imagine what it's like spending very long shifts looking at all the worst things that have been posted on Facebook. And because these are Facebook moderators, they have access to lots of private groups. So you might think Facebook's not that bad, okay? But there's lots of stuff goes on in private groups. So lots of violence, lots of misogyny, lots of racism, sexual material, all kinds of stuff that's happening within these groups, and they have to look at the worst of this material, and they have to make a decision. Is that a kind of it's a violent but consensual activity that's taking place, or is this somebody being abused? Is this a violent or consensual sex act that's taking place, or is this somebody being abused? Even if it's consensual, can that person give consent? Are they inebriated? Are they underage? And they've got to watch all this material. Here is somebody who's clearly drunk, can't give consent, but he's been abused by somebody. Okay. Here is somebody who's been beaten up by other people. Here is people swapping abuse, etc., 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 etc. And to be looking at all this stuff day in, day out must be quite difficult. Okay. Very good read, something worth looking at. The problem is, it's difficult. Even if you employed 10,000 moderators or 100,000 moderators, it's difficult to scale up where human beings have to look at potentially abusive material, material that contravenes the community guidelines, and they're having to look at that in real time, okay, and make a decision about it. So it's difficult to scale up. Software approaches might help. So we've got filters that may be in that may try and detect nipples and things like that, or may look for kind of keywords and things that might trigger action. But again, it can be quite problematic to detect. Okay. So the social networks are also a focus, like we said, of cyberbullying, other technologies too, but the other technologies are kind of they're less of a focus now. So social networks, mobile apps, etc., etc. That's why we spend a lot of time thinking about it and talking about it. People congregate on the social networks. Okay, And we need to think as well, are there other disinhibiting characteristics at play here? Whoops. And it goes back to, do we engage in things where it's mediated through technology that we wouldn't do if we were face to face? Many of us face to face would be much more polite to people than we might be if we're communicating via social media, social networks. Especially true if we're using an anonymized identity, right? Because it might be very liberating, it might be essential in some ways, it might be that protects us from other things that are going on. But even the best of us may engage in problematic behaviour. It may also be, of course, that there's no intermediaries there, there's no capable guardian there, there's nobody to say, oh, do you know what, you've had far too much to drink tonight, stop sending those texts. And your friend might be that. We think of the capable guardian, okay, as often being a very formal figure, but sometimes it's your friend. And if you were very drunk and abusive in a pub or a club, hopefully your friends would say, oh, just pack it in, just what are you doing? Yeah, just don't. Whatever they would say to you, but you get the kind of thing, there'd be social restraints taking place. So even if you'd lost all self-control and all your inhibitions, that somebody would be controlling you in that way. But if you're simply typing stuff into a keyboard or typing stuff into a phone, yeah, you might have friends in the same room or friends in the same household, but they don't necessarily know that you are drunkenly or whatever messaging, right, all kinds of abusive stuff, either under your own identity or under an anonymized identity. So there are different things that come in play here, things that we can think about and that we can relate to throughout the module. Okay, thank you very much for the moment.